There have been a lot of debates recently about the current voting process, voting by mail, complications regarding that. My team at Grizzly Shields and I were interested in having a conversation about the reasons why we don't have a voting app yet, what some of the barriers to implementation might be, and our personal goals for how one should be implemented when it does come to be the case. I am really excited to announce that for this video, I collaborated with one of my very favorite TikTok creators, A Great Dane. He's a fantastic human being. I love him to pieces with all of my heart, so thank you again to Eli for doing that with us. And go follow him on TikTok at A Great Danes. So what you're about to see is a conversation between me and some of the team at Grizzly Shields, as well as Eli himself, about a voting app, our opinions on it, how realistic we think it is, how we think it should work, etc. We think it's really important to start this conversation, so I would love to hear your opinions in the comments. Please let us know what you think. Please share this video to anybody who has the power to start getting work done on this. Just please give us your thoughts. Enjoy the conversation. I love you guys. Stay safe.
So everyone, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for taking part in this conversation. I think this topic that we're going to discuss is very important and timely in a world that is dealing with not only a pandemic, but a time where a person's voice really needs to be heard. And so what we're going to talk today in a roundtable type format is about why don't we have a voting app? It's 2020. If any time to have something like that, I believe, is now. I'd like to just open up the conversations. We'll go around a little bit about myself. My name is William Worthington. I've been the CISO of many organizations, both large and small. So I'm really coming from a security-minded aspect within this discussion. So that's how I'm going to approach my answers. So the topic is, how do you feel about voting in general? We'll start with Eli.
Hi, I'm Eli. I am a personality on the internet. Stay a crude bathroom stand-up. Voting has been integral in my life since I think Barack Obama was his first term was, or second term was the first election that I got to vote in. And since then, politics has been very important. It has only become more important.
So you want to take the opportunity to vote any chance you can? Is that, I mean, you see it as an important part of America?
I do. I absolutely do. I feel as though it is important to vote every opportunity you get, but also to vote on the things that you are informed on. Voting is important, but I think informed voting is so much more important. Just checking names because they sound familiar or interesting is kind of counterintuitive. So in that regard, yes, I do think it is important. I think voting on the smallest, like city councils, the things that directly impact your life are very important, but I think being informed about them is also equally as important, which in the interest of an app, I feel as though it would be not a far leap to not only have just the input to vote, but also to have like information on each proposition, each council member, each, you know what I mean? That would be so much greater than the system that we have now.
Enabling that real-time education of what you're voting on.
Yes, absolutely. It really ultimately comes down to user interface, and I think the packet that they send you three months before you vote that you have to study as though it's like your SATs, and then remember as you go back to, you know what I mean, punching your ballot on your lunch break is not as effective as maybe a blurb or something that we're all familiar with in the 21st century.
Yeah. Right.
Can I actually jump in on that? Oh, first, hi, I'm Ray. I have a background in theater actually, but now I'm a self-taught software developer, usually sort of in like the digital media art space, and also a pen tester and a digital media artist, like kind of freelance. So my background is the development side and the security side, but also from sort of like the human side. I think that one of the biggest things that Eli, that you articulated so like beautifully, and also Bill, you kind of brought up with just the implication of being like, it's 2020, why don't we have a voting app, is the fact that like considering the format in which we consume so much of our information and like perform so many of our interactions and like even our work on a daily basis in this age is usually through applications. If we're doing our banking from our iPhones, or if we're exchanging information like that, it seems a little strange to be using a system that is so challenging for so many people to access with something that is as important as voting, that is supposed to be this incredible patriotic act, how you're supposed to be able to use your voice in a country that is supposed to represent your interests. It seems odd that already we don't have election day as a national holiday. There's like specific polling places that you have to physically go to. You have to stand in line. You can vote by mail theoretically, but even that has been controversial recently. There's a lot of barriers that are put in place to something that should be a very fundamental part of being an American, I would say. I believe this does extend to other countries where elections are held, but I'm speaking as an American because that's just the experience that I have personally. Furthermore, from like a software development perspective, it would be so awesome like to develop something like what you're saying, Eli, where you can get more information on the choices that you have, because I know like so many of us show up and they're like, I know that I'm voting for so and so as the president, and then I get there. The first time I voted, I was like, there's other stuff, and like I'm a pretty informed person, like generally. And the first time I voted, I was like, what is this? I was like, there's a lot of reading that I didn't do. I feel like I didn't do the homework. Like I'm sitting there like Googling, hoping that I was Googling stuff, hoping they're not like seeing me on my phone, like so that I can figure out who these people are, because the education is such an important part. Like education and communication and information is the most valuable currency in a lot of ways, especially in this age of the uncertainty of facts. Theoretically, having a system that would allow instant access, especially in the situation where we are today technologically, where that's not even like a hard thing to build. I also just think it would be like cool to build. Like I think that it would really engage people, especially in a time where if we're looking at like, what was it, 46% of the country did not vote. Like the amount of engagement I believe that we would get if we turned it into something that was actually accessible for everyone, I think would be really inspiring. I think would be really great. In Germany, the thought of not voting is ridiculous. Like that's unheard of. Nobody would ever not vote. It's like people fought and died so that you could do this. Why would you ever not? But again, there it's also an international holiday and all that other stuff. So I think there's just some cultural access issues that need to be addressed, that could be addressed. I don't know.
My name is Omar Barron. I've settled and decided to call myself a cybersecurity consultant. I say that because I've done so many different things in the information security field. It's getting harder and harder to label yourself in one specific area of expertise when it comes to InfoSec. So my background has always been in IT. I have done professional services for IT deployments, multi-factor deployments, SIM deployments, configurations. I've also done a lot of incident response. So I've been with several companies who have experienced a breach of one form or another, sometimes multiple. And I've been behind the systems that secure or are supposed to be securing systems. So I have an understanding at a technical level and a security level for the implications that a voting app could have. So that's one side. On the other side, again, this is actually going to be my second presidential voting opportunity because I've recently become a citizen. I was previously unable to vote. Now, the other side of my perspective is somebody who has been dying and waiting and just hoping and wishing for the day that I could participate in the privilege and honor of voting in this country, which makes my stance even more interesting because I know the importance of voting. We have to do it. It changes the world. But I also understand that a voting app has so many security implications and risks. But I personally feel like it's needed. Maybe the rest of the country might not agree. It's, in my opinion, going to be as painful as switching from horse and carriage to horseless carriage. It's that big of a jump. We need to approach it very carefully. So I'm approaching it with skepticism as far as the security goes, because I may not necessarily trust the people whose hands the system will be in.
I guess I would argue with that. They're in the hands of those, whether it's manual or digital, but let's explore that. I think it's far beyond the point where this is possible. We'll get into that discussion in a little bit about the technical sides of this, but just the importance of one's voice in a time where I haven't seen it in my lifetime. I mean, I was born a while ago and I can never reveal that, but demonstrations, they weren't really a thing that my generation did. It was done before me in the 60s. So seeing the masses coming together and having a common voice and bringing that voice forward, this is historic for me. I think that it's the time for the voice to be heard, and an app would allow that, in my opinion. To be honest with you, I was in the military and I didn't vote that much until I got older and I saw the impact not voting caused me and my loved ones. And so it is so essential. So again, thank you for having this conversation with me today. So the next question I want to pose to you is, how do you feel currently about the voting options that we have, both mail-in and in-person voting? Do you think it will be sufficient?
I believe it would be sufficient in the same way that 4 lanes on a highway is sufficient. It's something we've always had, so it still works. And with the proposed advancement of an app, ultimately the only thing that it would take away from in-person voting would be like kind of like tradition of it, which I'm all for. With the advancement of an app for voting, you do have the communal aspect of it. Everyone is going to do it in the same way that everyone was on TikTok during the shutdown and everyone's on Facebook right now, like arguing. In a way, it brings us together, hopefully for the better. Voting as it has been is sufficient. It's just not as efficient as it could be.
And I would argue sufficient for normal circumstances. And we're not in normal circumstances anymore. Like,
yes.
It's a 4-lane highway with 2 lanes under construction.
It's a 4-lane highway with 3 lanes under construction and a border facility that will only accept passports from every country you don't live in.
And an accident. So yeah.
It's an accident.
I personally have never experienced any obstacles in voting or getting to a location or anything like that. I have personally done by mail, purely out of convenience. This is the first time where I've experienced a situation like we're in now. Fortunately for me, it's still sufficient. I am still confident that I will be able to vote unobstructed. But that's just speaking for myself, because we see the impact that schools are shut down, kids are at home, parents are struggling to find care. They're going to be experiencing a lot of things in that manner, which may prevent them from being able to register to vote, keeping track of your mail, not being able to find the location in person. I don't know, anything. Maybe you've never voted before or whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, I think it is going to be more difficult in some manner, this election, than previous ones. And I worry that people who are actively trying to vote are making every effort. I don't want them to be impeded in any way. I do believe an app, with security issues aside, would absolutely give everybody more accessibility.
I agree with the statement that under conventional circumstances, the system is sufficient. But at the same time, to me, these are unconventional circumstances, not only in the fact that there's a pandemic and so that there needs to be an entire layer of difficulty that's added to an already non-terrible but non-ideal system to make sure that everything, people are 6 feet apart and everyone's wearing masks and everything is sanitized, all that jazz, right? I think another thing that's unconventional is a sentiment of mistrust. Omar, you talked about the security issues of the app. I completely agree that my biggest concern would be not only individuals falsifying results, but also even attempting to spread rumors that results had been falsified can have an incredibly powerful impact on reality. If this is going to be my theater major self speaking through my developer mouth, the story that we tell ourselves about who we are literally creates our reality. That's the reason why rhetoric from politicians doesn't always need to rely on statistics to be effective. The terrifying reason that that is true is that if you tell people you are afraid, they will believe you, because on some level, everyone's afraid, everyone's sad. If you can make people feel understood by tapping into a truth that is true about everyone, whatever reason you give them for that fear, you're like, you're afraid. They're like, yes, I am. Oh my God, how'd you know that? They're like, I know. And it's because of this group of people or this thing. Then they're like, oh, that must be the case because you knew the first thing, so thus I trust you implicitly. That degrades faith in things that I, as a science person, have faith in, which is facts and numbers and data. There has been a lot of talk in the media about perceived sabotage of the post office ideas, that the actual processes that we have, even as they already were imperfect, are under threat. And so it seems...
Or perceived threat.
Sure. Both sides seem to think the other side is sabotaging the process. We've seen things like videos of lines at a polling center that stretch for miles and don't move for an entire day, and entire groups of people who show up to vote and aren't allowed to. These are the things that we need to avoid, and that an app would allow us to avoid. We talk about the mail system and the idea that ballots can be lost or simply thrown away, right? These are the things that we need to be able to avoid. My thought with having it be an application would be to install some kind of automatic process for at least registering if your vote has been accepted or not, right? So you as a user can get a tally at the same time as your vote is counted, as your ballot is cast, so that you can see, okay, I just want to make sure that I did cast my vote, right? That it did get counted, and I know who to contact if I'm not heard and counted, because I did stand and I did try to raise my voice.
I think it's a challenge that we face as IT professionals, specifically in the security field, that technologies has gotten so complicated that not everybody has the time to commit to understanding how the technology works in order to feel confident and have the faith that the technology is sound. So the same problem I think we're facing with the CDC and science in general is constantly being questioned. If they don't understand it completely, it turns into magic. Therefore, it can be manipulated. Where a more logical approach, looking at ones and zeros and a program world that I feel with blockchain and the advances that we have made within the code and computer industry, that we have the technology to give in real time the acknowledgement that your vote was counted and cannot be altered because of the complex crypto algorithms that exist today to preserve that integrity. But it's going to have to take, in my opinion, educating the truth about the technology in order to get the support of the technology. And it's not something you can rip out all at once. This is going to have to be, in my opinion, a phased approach where we now offer the app as well as voting in person and mail-in voting. And over time, it will become the majority, I think. To that, do you agree with that statement or not?
I 1,000% agree with that. As Ray was mentioning, the kind of scrutiny that an app would be under, you're trying to sell ketchup to a woman in white gloves, because the predominant demographic of people who did definitely vote all the time are older people who don't necessarily gel with technology. I feel as though you wouldn't have an issue pitching a voting app to a younger generation, seeing as how TikTok still has billions of users, and throughout the last 4 months, it's been under heavy scrutiny as spyware, malware. It's one of those things where, like, once you kind of thrown your life on the internet, it's like, who isn't? The safety of an app, especially for, again, a generation who doesn't read the term of agreement, doesn't necessarily.
Well, and I think that's why you allow the other options to be there for that comfort level. But how do you get them to move past just the acceptance that other people want to use this option?
I mean, I think another question is, like, who's going to build it that we all trust to be non-partisan? I think that there are definitely groups out there, but again, part of the problem is almost this public declaration of trust that you need for everyone to agree to use it. You need prominent members of each party to say, like, we have certified that these developers are unbiased and are engineering this to not have any bias, like, one way or the other, which I think is possible and honestly would probably be good. I think that some cooperation and communication, what I call across the aisle, or what across the proverbial aisle, would not be the worst thing.
Why wouldn't you just make it open source? Like crypto encryption is only a mathematical equation that can't be solved. Why not put the app open for everybody to see the code, so therefore they can see that there's nothing suspicious going on?
I mean, I guess,
like, no secrets, right?
Yeah, I think though that would make me scared from a security perspective, because cryptography, it's not so much that, like, it's a mathematical equation that can't be solved. It's a mathematical equation that's so hard to solve. You're
Well,
just
yes.
hoping that people won't try. But there is a section of the population that will, and there is a smaller section that does exist, however, that will succeed. For something that is this important and has as many very powerful, very wealthy individuals with as high stakes in it as there are, I don't know if laying your cards on the table in that way would be safe. But maybe that's just me being overly conservative in terms
Well,
of, like,
obviously I feel that if this app was developed, it would have to be done by a neutral party with no affiliation to either party and have no funds coming from anywhere other than maybe private, or maybe if it's funded by our taxes 100%. So there's no partisan collaboration there, and you let the people build it and manage it. Don't let the government do it. Put it in the hands of a company or somebody that the people chooses to manage that power.
I'm just picturing the National Voting App Git repository, and my heart is getting, like, it's getting warm, but it's beating very fast.
I personally do think that the technology is there, available now. It's just been maybe the circumstances weren't necessarily always there. And maybe we've had some complacency in the way that we're accustomed to things. For example, we would say, no, you can't work remote. You have to be at work. You can't possibly do your job from home. Right? You throw that out the window, right? School can't be done from home through a webcam. Throw that one out the window. My kids are in school, right? And I almost feel that same way with the voting app. We're starting to put ourselves in situations where we have to change, and it's painful, but we're learning and growing from it. As painful as that is, it's going to start to make us more resilient. And I think that the voting app will be welcomed more than I may have led on that I believed. So I think it's possible. I think it could happen. I do like the idea of open source, because one of my fears, again, is we choose a company however we decide. Do we do a term? Do we allow companies to bid? You know, is it a contract? Are we allowed to vote for that? Who decides ultimately? Is it based on cash or a vote? So there's a whole lot of things to take into account. But to answer your question, again, the technology is there. I think the time to act is now. It will probably be a little painful, but I feel like it will be adapted.
Eli, I'd love to hear your thoughts, not being overly technical like the rest of us. How you feel about it? Like, is it scary?
Considering I'm still on TikTok, I don't find anything internet security scary anymore. But I am curious as to whether or not, in an effort to gain the trust of the public, if it could be done like in tandem, like in a demo, like if the next election or on smaller elections, if said app were to ask people who are voting to vote in tandem with the app to see if it would output a correct summation. Vote total result. That's the word. If it were to put out an accurate result in tandem with like an actual like election, if that would then kind of get more people on the train as things were to roll forward. But yeah, no, in terms of fear, again, I really don't think you're going to have too big of an issue pitching modern voting to a younger audience. I think ultimately the only thing that would get in the way is the fear of change and the narrative that people who are against voting, because of the opportunity to suppress voting as it stands now, to, you know what I mean, sway an election in one favor. I think voting as of right now is a little too malleable. And I think that an honest vote using an app might be a little scary for those people who are actually of problem.
It also might be an interesting opportunity to implement some things like other forms of voting. This is kind of taking in the opposite direction. This is me saying it could also do this thing that is less conservative and would be harder to pitch to people. But it makes things easier, like, for example, like ranked choice voting, like they have in Maine. Like Maine for like Maine. Yeah, okay. Like, why don't we have this? Like, I don't understand why we don't use ranked choice voting. It would solve so many issues and it's so easy. And it makes, like, the results are, if you watch the like state like election campaign footage, whatever, like video advertisement they make in Maine, they're like, it's not like bashing on people. So like the goal is just for you to pick the person that you hate less. It's like Nancy and Steve in Maine like are on the camera together, and they're like holding, they're like on, you know, arm in arm, and maybe this is performative, but it seems okay to it's Maine. And so they're like, hey, like, I'm Nancy, and he's like, and I'm Steve, and Nancy's like, and so you can vote for either of us in the election. You can put me as your first choice and him as your second, and then he goes, or you can put her as the second choice and me as your first. And they're like, but whatever you do, like, we promise, like, we'll do our best to sort of like make Maine good because we both love Maine. And I'm like, wow, they both love Maine. And so now suddenly we get to pick the person who we think is like, who loves Maine like I do. Like, that's what I want. I want to be able to pick the person who I'm like, I think you would do the best job. Like, you are my favorite. I don't want to have this fear of like, if I vote along the lines of my beliefs rather than the lines of trying to prevent the person I hate the most from getting elected, I would vote for a different person. But with the awareness of how our current voting system works, I don't have the freedom to actually use my voice to pick the person that I most believe in. I need to vote along lines of prevention. That means that no matter who wins, most of us are not happy. Like, that's, most of us are like, okay, like, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, which I just, call me a perfectionist, but I really believe that nobody should walk away from a presidential election being like, woo, well, this sucks, but at least it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Like,
Well, yeah.
I want people to be like, yay, I'm proud, I feel good about this, I feel represented, I feel like I'm being heard. Like, I think that's what every person wants who like believes in the tenets of America. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Cannot
So-
agree with you. I will just one more thing, because I feel as though that is the kind of the big issue that is plaguing politics right now, is just partisan politics. It's gotten so unbelievably out of control since the Clinton administration, since the Reagan administration. Honestly, since Nixon, it's all been downhill. Everyone's just reverting to party line as far as they could possibly go. And I feel as though ranked choice voting would absolutely bring back a sense of voting for morals, voting for actual like change. It would actually elicit a result that is true majority voting. Like, you know what I mean? The actual vast majority is moving
like mathematically, it is the actual majority if you do. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Absolutely. My only fear is that might be too much change too fast. You know what I mean? I think in terms of an app versus ranked choice voting, we got to pick one or the other ultimately to make it, you know what I mean, efficient. But I could not agree with ranked choice voting any more than
Putting politics aside and putting on my InfoSec hat. When I talk about security, and when we talk about security, I feel like people in the industry have a better understanding of what we're actually talking about. But if you break it down to a more basic description, think about it this way. At some point, everybody will have to register to vote. Let's say we're implementing this program. That data is going to have to be stored somewhere. So think about, where is it going to be stored? Who is going to store it? Who would accept the liability? Second, who's going to secure that? Who's going to monitor that data for breaches? And now think of it when it comes time for election. Who can confidently say their infrastructure is ready to support a defense against DDoS attack worldwide? Are they confident the uptime is going to be available? How are they going to secure my access, right? Can somebody log in as me, vote as me, steal my information? So those are just mainly questions that I can't answer.
I mean, to that, I would say, we already have to store the information on who's registered to vote somewhere. Like that structure is already in place. Plus, if you think about like the information that is being stored on US citizens, just like there are server farms that are already populated with that data. But I also would say the US is actually kind of one of the only countries where it is your job to register to vote. Many countries, like, again, I'm going to use Germany again, you are just automatically registered to vote. Like, it's not like they don't know who you are. It's not like they don't know that you're 18 now. It's the way that, like, you get a draft card when you're 18, you know what I mean? We could do it so that you're automatically registered to vote. It wouldn't even be, like, hard. It feels like there's just these unnecessary barriers to voting.
Well,
like,
so I guess that's kind of the rub, right? Do you want
yes,
the
they do.
government to develop this and own it and control it? Because you're all registered anyways. If you have a social security number, you're already documented. Do you want the people to own this app, or do you want the government to own this app? I think the government owned it. They already own the data. They already have all this information on you. So it's not a big stretch to say, well, you already have it, so why don't you store it and protect it like you are already, right?
I wish that it didn't have to be like the government versus the people. I know that this has never been the reality of this country, but the legend of this country was supposed to be a government by the people for the people, right? So I would just like to take a moment to bemoan the fact that we're in a situation where we're like, how do I protect myself from the government? Like that's a little sad. I'm having a little
Well, but
sad.
I mean,
But no,
is it us, or are we speaking for the masses, right?
No,
The
but I agree.
attitude right now is we don't
had,
trust the government.
Right. We've also always had like checks and balances, and like the right to bear arms is supposed to be like the right to overthrow the government, even though the government now has drones. But for like, anyway, whatever it ends up being, it can't be a corporation. I'm going to just say that. I think that it's possible for it to be like a group of citizens who like get a stipend from the government but aren't like not a division of the government. Some group that doesn't change depending on what party is in power. No cabinet member.
Like the military.
Yeah, like citizens who are in charge of it. But I don't think it's a good idea to rent it out to a corporation, just because I feel like another huge issue that we have in this country is like corporations having more power than citizens over the government.
Well, I mean, now we're getting into
not to get into that, but I just feel
getting back to the app. To be honest with you, I think we just need to start having the conversation. There's no way that anything's going to happen for the election that's coming, but we have 4 years to continuously to have this conversation and push this agenda forward. That I think if we collectively as the people keep having the conversation, somebody's eventually going to listen to us. So to end on a positive note, I'd like to hear what you would like to see in an app that would in your mind, enhance your voting experience?
So actually kind of winding it back, because I believe
Okay.
Omar actually hit the nail on the head. No, I just expanding on something, because you did mention that all of the voter registration information is stored somewhere. So no one would bat an eye if like you go to register online or check to see if you're registered online, and 2 pages down it's like coming soon, vote online. And they're like, oh, okay, this makes sense. It's something I've seen before. But what I would like to see, and again, maybe it's not even attached to the voting app, but I think just the voting experience is something that is completely independent, where politicians, in the same vein as I think Chris Evans is doing this bipartisan, independent, like starting point situation, where politicians can kind of come on and make a pitch over a certain topic, but contained political ads, 15-second bit for whatever politician at whatever level, presidential, comptroller, like where it's like, this is what I'm going to do. One place where it's all accessible. It doesn't the only people who can then add content to said app would be political offices, and then it is directly viewed by the voting audience, and then you are essentially it's an easier way of informing yourself before you kind of go to vote. I think that is one thing that I would love to see,
like a political TikTok.
Yes, literally, exactly. Political TikTok. Like, it doesn't necessarily all have to be videos, but you can expand on it into articles or whatever, but with something that is easily poppable, just easily accessible,
consumable.
Yes, thank you. Yes, yeah, exactly. I think that in tandem with the voting experience, either as it is now by mail, in person, or with the grace of the universe, eventually all digital, as is the way we are moving. I think that is something I would love to see personally.
Myself personally, I would like to see mandatory multi-factor authentication. I think we're at the point where it should no longer be an option. It just should be a default setting.
Agreed.
I would want P2P encryption, point-to-point encryption. I would like my data encrypted at rest, maybe in a serverless environment, highly available, highly secure, with transparency for my data. I know that's a tall order, but you said, what do I want? Well, that's that's
okay. Now, what about functionality of the app? What do you want? What do you want the app to do for you?
He's like, that is my functionality.
Security, just security.
I don't even want to be able to log in.
I would like to be able to see real-time analytics for any particular event we're voting on, up-to-date information. I'd like to see a bio of people I'm voting for. I'd like to see their voting history, information about candidates, resources regarding federal, the Constitution, rights, things like that. Everything.
So a central repository of all government laws and knowledge that as a citizen you should have accessibility to.
Absolutely.
Well, that would be amazing.
It'll have a FOIA plugin.
There you go. All right, Ray, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say definitely all of that. I think my biggest thing would be like accessibility. I think it is completely possible. We have same-day voter registration already. I think that the app should be able to register you to vote the day that you try to use it. It should sort of capitalize on all of the existing like translation technology and accessibility technology. So it should be able to give you whatever language you need. There should be like support for ASL. There should be just support for text to speech. It'd be great if we could try to make it available not just in an application but as a web portal, so that if you don't have access to a device, you can still log on in like a public computer in like a library or something. The two-factor authentication, I totally agree with Omar. It obviously would be harder if you don't have like a phone or something, but theoretically there could some other thing that you, even if it was just like your social security number, I don't know, something like that you could put.
I would even be okay
email,
with biometrics. Biometrics
or email, biometric, anything like that. It's just like the education, even just on like, I totally love the voting history of the candidates, the things that they've actually done, like actions that they've actually taken, but also the things that they've put out about themselves, and the updated analytics, even information on voting itself and like the voting process and what the electoral college is and how it works in this country and like what it means to vote. If there could be a little tab on what did I just do? Like, I just clicked this button that said vote. What actually does that mean? Like, what is the process? Like, what am I actually influencing? I think that like just some more transparency, because we all watch like School of Rock in elementary school, right? I feel like I got a very different impression for how this works from School of Rock than like it actually works. Like, because in my head it goes differently. I don't know. I thought a bill became a law a very different way than it does. And like I look at it, I'm like, oh, I guess that like would make sense for how you explain it to a kid. But I think that the great thing about an app is that you could give access to, those videos that's like a software developer explains the internet like at 7 different levels of difficulty. Like, you could just have, here's the basic overview and here's step 2 and here's, you know what I mean, for people who want to do more, and you could just have like the resources available and everything like that to give people information. Also, I think that it would be great. This app in my head is for the 2020 election. I know that it's not, but if it did exist, it would have like COVID resources and like information on the pandemic and information on where to go to protect yourself and all that. Because I think that is a global problem.
So I agree with everything you guys have said. All of that would be an amazing advantage to a voter to have the knowledge before making such an important decision. What I would also like to add to that would be notification immediately that my vote has counted. When I deposit a check, I immediately get notification that that check has been deposited.
The transaction ID.
The
right?
transaction
and a number
has
to call
occurred.
if
Right.
there's a problem, like, and a number to call if it's like your vote is like being processed, like if after 3 days like your vote is still being processed, I want to know what congressperson I'm about to like destroy their inbox.
The other thing that I think is awesome is I get notification constantly that someone's trying to get into my Steam account. So being notified that someone tried to cast a ballot in my name, or that someone did cast a ballot in my name, and I can go, whoop, nope, that wasn't me. That would be amazing. I think that would bring trust back to the system that your vote actually counts. And I think that would encourage more participation in the system itself. I guess to conclude, I want to thank all of you. I think this is a very important subject, as I stated before. And I think the more we bring it up on all our social media platforms, in discussion with our parents, with our friends, within the circle that we've had to form related to the situation of the world that we're in, have the conversation, bring it up. And if you have the ability to have a voice to influence others, try to influence others to just talk about the subject. I think it's unrealistic to try to push this anytime soon, but the more we talk about it, the more the chance of it coming to the surface. So I just want to thank you all. And if anybody has anything to add, please.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I cannot agree again more with anything we've said. I feel as though it's absolutely necessary, and we do. I mean, you can't have change without the conversation first. I don't think I have anything else to add except Ray, you're completely right in that School of Rock has shaped so much.
Telling you, it's like
really ultimately not how things work. So I think the constant push to educate and re-educate ourselves is absolutely necessary. And I think with something like this, we might again get over this political partisan kind of hump where everything is, you know what I mean, us versus the enemy, and might actually get to a point of civil discourse where we can have differing opinions and still sit in the same room together. And I think that is something that we should absolutely move towards. I think it's kind of the way that things used to be like in the 70s, where, you know what I mean, people could, oh, they're swingers, everyone was still friends. Optimistic, wholeheartedly optimistic.
I agree with that completely. It would just be great to get everybody kind of back on the same page again a little bit, because I feel like another thing is that it's great to remember that in America, like, you know, at least in theory, nothing is more patriotic than demanding that your country rise to the occasion in any format, than like protesting, than like opening discourse, like saying that things need to change. Often people who speak out saying that like there are issues, especially in this country, like saying like there are issues in this country that need to be addressed, are accused of not loving this country. And I would argue that like, no, like that isn't necessarily true. I think if you love something, you don't want to see it fail. Like you don't want to see it destroy itself. You don't want to see it in torment and in pain. Like if you love something, you want to see it be as good as it always claimed it was, even if it never truly achieved that, right? Like you want to see it be absolutely the best that it can be for every person in it that you really deeply care about. There is nothing more patriotic or more American than criticism for the purpose of betterment. The less time we spend feeling attacked by one another, and the sooner we get to the point where we understand, oh, you and I are both just trying to make things better. If we got back to the point where like we're on the same team and we should just discuss strategy, I think that'd be better.
I completely agree with you. Blind acceptance without critique is kind of like raising children without discipline.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you want the best for them, but you have to like put like checks and like, no, you don't do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because again, without that mold, without that form, chaos.
You know, myself, my fears are mainly in just the security of the data and the application. I am very excited because we're living through history. If and when this app gets deployed, it's going down in the books. I'm not very worried about the learning curve. In reality, you know, my son will say, "Dad, my iPad died. Where's your Chromebook?" Then he'll say, your Chromebook died, where's your laptop? The older generation, for example, my in-laws, they were the flip phone users, right? And now in the modern day, they me a DM on Snapchat, right? So they've evolved quite a bit. So, they're high-end phone users. So I'm very optimistic. I'm excited. This is going to be life-changing.
Agreed. And thank you all for the conversation.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
I'll leave my window open, pretend you'll come inside. Can't fix what isn't broken, can't miss what isn't mine.